Hello and welcome back to another coffee break episode of Unfiltered and Unbound. My name is Kate Baxter and I'm your host. Today, I want to talk about something that has sparked a bit of a response online recently, and it's the money conversations women in our 50s need to be having. This is not financial advice, but more awareness. I want to talk about the practical, sometimes uncomfortable conversations that can make a very big difference when life changes unexpectedly. So on TikTok recently, I started a conversation about women and money. And I talked a little bit about my mother's generation. So when my mother got married, even though she continued to work, she delegated managing the finances to her husband because at the time, women were basically told not to worry their pretty little heads about money. That was a man's job. And that social conditioning resulted in a generation of women who often didn't actively participate in managing their own finances. Now, this eventually came back to bite my mother when my father passed away unexpectedly. She had no access to the bank accounts. She didn't know where the superannuation was. She didn't know where important paperwork is kept, including things like the deed to the house. She really didn't know what their overall financial position looked like. And whilst I would like to think we are past those days, I actually don't think we completely are. In relationships, we often naturally divide responsibilities based on what we feel comfortable with. And if managing finances isn't your role, that's okay, but we should still know the basics. I do still meet women who don't know how to access internet banking, what accounts exist, what the passwords are, what insurance policies are in place, where the will is kept, and what super funds they have. Now, this is not about blaming women. As I said, it's about creating awareness because life does change. People get sick, relationships end, people pass away unexpectedly. And the worst possible time to try and understand your finances is during the middle of a crisis. So if you take anything away from this episode, let it be this. Know where the important documents are, know how to access your accounts, know what you own, know what you owe. Know where your superannuation is, make sure there is a will, and make sure someone you trust knows where all of this information is kept. Now, the other thing that came up after I posted about that on TikTok was aging parents, because many women are now finding themselves having these same conversations, but from the other side of the table. How do I even start this conversation with my parents? And I understand why this is so very, very hard. Because for a lot of aging parents, conversations about wills, bank accounts, powers of attorney, and paperwork feel less like planning and more like being forced to confront their own mortality. And that can be really uncomfortable. So I think the way we approach these conversations matters. What I probably wouldn't do is sit down and say, we need to talk about your finances, because immediately people become defensive. Instead, you probably want to approach it from a place of care and practical support. Something more like, I know this is uncomfortable, but I'd rather understand things now while we can still talk about it calmly together than try and figure it out during a crisis. Or, if something happened unexpectedly, would we know where to find important information? So, this is not about control. It's about reducing stress for everyone later. And you do not need to solve everything in one conversation. So, start small. Find out where things are, like the important paperwork. Where is that kept? Whether there's a will, who manages the accounts, whether anyone else has access if needed, where the insurance or superannuation details are stored. Basically everything we've already just talked about. And sometimes just opening the door to the conversation is the hardest part, because avoidance often feels easier in the short term, but confusion and panic later are much, much harder. So as I said, it's not about fear. It's not about being left in the dark if something changes. And I think these are the conversations women in their 50s absolutely need to be having, because understanding your finances isn't about expecting the worst. It's about making sure you're not left trying to figure out something during one of the hardest moments of your life. Maybe you were included in the financial conversations, but not always encouraged to lead them. Maybe this stage of life is where that changes. And this is not from fear or distrust, but from understanding that being financially aware is part of taking care of ourselves and the people that we love. Because clarity creates choices, and none of us should be left trying to navigate major life changes without knowing where we stand. If you enjoyed this coffee break episode of Unfiltered and Unbound, please make sure you follow, like, and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if this conversation resonated with you, please share it with another woman who might need to hear it too. because these are the conversations we need to be having more openly. This podcast is independently created and not sponsored, so if you'd like to support the show, I do have a Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes. Thanks for being here, and I will see you next time on Unfiltered and Unbound.